thank you all very much for coming along. Really grateful. Back in August last year, I was leading the platform health team at the Financial Times, and our team was split between London and Cluj in Romania. We had been in Cluj for around a week, spending time with our team and planning the next quarter's worth of work. And that weekend, I thought it'd be quite nice to travel to a nearby town and visit the famous salt mines that are nearby. Halfway through the journey, I started to get phone calls from our first-line operations team and my boss. And it turned out that we'd just had a major network outage at one of our UK data centres, and we were seeing a huge number of problems across the business. Since it was a weekend in August, most of my friends and colleagues were either away or travelling or on holiday. But despite that, we were able to get a handful of key people online quickly from each team. Our incident lead at the time was coordinating everything from their mobile phone while in a car on the motorway, but don't worry, they weren't driving at the time. I myself was in an open field, hiking across the hills to get to the salt mines, and I was lucky to find a cafe where I could sit down, get online, and start to help investigate the issue, along with a beer. While our workaround took a bit longer than we'd have liked, we managed to get everything stabilised without any major business impact. The team of people who fixed this were spread across multiple locations and 4 different countries. Next week, once we were back in the office, we found that the problem had been caused by another customer who shared our data centre, and it turned out that they'd accidentally cut the fibre connection which provided internet access to all of our production servers. If we hadn't already been used to working remotely and collaborating across multiple locations, it definitely would have taken us a lot longer to get this resolved. And fortunately, my hike across the hills wasn't wasted either, because once we had the workaround in place for that weekend, I still had time to go and visit the salt mines. They're really interesting actually, so if you've ever wanted to sail a boat on an underground lake, then I definitely recommend a visit. So, I'm a senior engineer at the Financial Times, and currently I work on the operations support team. We're responsible for production systems and technology across the globe. Although we're most famous for the newspaper, we're primarily a digital content company these days. And this year we actually hit 1 million paying subscribers. Revenue from our online subscriptions has overtaken the physical newspaper and our advertising as well. What that means for us is that our content and our website are absolutely critical to our business, and we invest heavily in technology. We try to empower our cross-functional engineering teams, and as part of that, they design, run, and support their systems from the beginning to the very end of the product lifecycle. To give you a sense of scale quickly, we have a total of 1,211 live production systems. 245 of those are what we call platinum, and they provide business-critical capabilities. These are things like our journalists being able to publish content, or customers being able to access the ft.com website. We believe in DevOps and agile working practices, and that means that we release to production about 150 times per day. And yes, that does include Fridays as well. And finally, there are probably around 60 plus third-party providers that we integrate with and depend upon. These are companies like Google, Verizon, and Vodafone. When I first started at the FT 5 years ago now, I didn't think of myself as working with remote teams. Because, after all, the team that I had joined was based in London, and I saw them every day in the office. These days, our main technology hubs are currently in London, Manila, and Sofia. I came to realise that although my team at the time were in a single location, we still needed to interact and collaborate with people in different countries and different time zones on a daily basis. And then when I started researching this talk, I realised that we had even more bureaus and journalism offices spread across the world. They're not our main technology hubs, but we still have people and services there that we need to support. I started to think more about this when I joined the operations team about 6 months ago now. Our mission is to ensure that the services supporting the FT are operational and available to our customers. And because we're a global company with offices and partners around the world, our team is split between London and Manila. And that means that we can provide 24/7 support to all of our systems and products, no matter where they're located. I'd previously led a team that was split across 2 locations, so I was familiar with some of the communication and culture challenges that can arise. In my old team, we always had to put extra effort in so that everyone knew what their teammates were working on. Video calls are pretty good these days, but they still add that extra layer of friction when it comes to communication. They're not quite as efficient as chatting face to face. And when people were stressed, there was always a risk that we could slide back into a us and them siloed mindset, and we were very careful to try and avoid that. However, now that I'd joined the operations team, there are actually 2 additional challenges that I hadn't run into before. The first is that there's a 7-hour time difference between London and Manila, and this is much wider than the 2-hour time window that I was used to between London and Sofia. The second challenge is that because we run a 24/7 shift rota, it means that we may only have a small number of the team working at any given time. When my old team needed to make a decision, it was relatively simple. We could all easily jump on a video call and then have a chat, come to an agreement. But when everyone is on shift across a much wider gap in time zones, that's simply not possible. Some people will be on the early shift and others will be on late. That's a bit more of an extreme example though, so how about everyone here in the audience? Who here frequently works remotely or with a team split across locations? Cool. Probably about half-ish, cool. Who mostly works for an office and has your whole team in a single place? Cool, maybe about 50-50 split. So. And who here doesn't like putting their hand up in the middle of conference talks? Because I definitely don't. Oh, that one normally got loads of people put up. So I quite enjoy reading the Stack Overflow developer surveys when they come out. And this year, it provided some interesting statistics around remote work. Of the people who responded, just over half said that they work remotely for at least a few days a month or more. And nearly 30% said that they work remote at least once a week, if not more frequently. About 40% said that they prefer working from home or a non-office location, and that might be related to the fact that almost 42% said that they find a distracting work environment their greatest challenge to productivity. My point here is that even if we don't work with a fully remote team, it's not uncommon for people to work from home or from different locations like coffee shops. This means that the increased difficulty of remote work may affect more of us than we might expect. The intent behind this talk was to discuss some of the challenges related to remote working that we've run into and to outline some of the things that we've tried to do to help with those. And to keep with the slightly tenuous theme of travel, I want to sketch a quick map of where we're going to go with this talk. So, first of all, we should go over by what I mean when I talk about remote teams and remote collaboration. Second, some of the challenges that we face when we need to communicate remotely. Third, how we can build a culture so that people in other locations don't feel isolated. And then finally, why we think it's important to enable this remote culture, even though it can be difficult. So, I've been talking for 40 slides already, but I've not defined what I mean by remote teams or remote communication. Let's do that now so that we're all on the same page. I really like Martin Fowler's blog post on this topic, and he groups team structures into roughly 4 categories. Going from least to most remote, we have a single site team where everyone is in the same physical location, usually within the same room or bank of desks. This makes it really easy to just turn around, speak to your teammates and see what they're doing. A multi-site team consists of 2 or more groups in different locations. So, for example, my operations team, which is split between our London office and our Manila office. Satellite working is when most of the team are in the same location, but a small number of them are working remotely. We have a few of these at the FT. For example, the Cloud Enablement team, and I'll talk more about them later. And finally, we have fully distributed teams, where everybody on the team works from their own location full-time. We can actually expand this to include fully distributed companies as well, where there is no central office. This has really grown in popularity over the last few years, especially with newer technology companies and startups. So those are four categories of team structure, but in reality, it's more of a sliding scale. In London, we moved into a new office about 6 months ago, and because we practice agile working, we don't have allocated desks, but teams have a given area that we can all sit together. Often, we'll find that some people will be on the roof enjoying the sun, while others will be in their team area, and then some other people might have found a quiet space somewhere where they can focus without being interrupted. What this means for us is that even when we're based in the same office, we still need to consider remote work. What if people regularly work from home every week? Or what if people on that team decide to go and move floors, to go and sit closer to their users, to get feedback on what they're working on? In our case, we often don't even realise when people are working from home because the majority of our communication is remote first and often done on Slack. It's quite common that we'll be talking and collaborating without too much trouble, and only later on realise that everyone is actually at home and working from their sofa. So with that in mind, let's go into some more detail around some of the challenges with remote communication and what we can do about them. Communication underpins almost everything that we do in technology and software development. It's one of the most valuable skills that any engineer can learn. So much of what we do relies on open, honest, and frequent communication, whether that's with our teammates or our stakeholders or our users. I was at DevReach conference in Sofia, Bulgaria, earlier on this week, and Jodie Davis was one of their keynote speakers there. She's a systems engineer at NASA. There was one thing that she said during her keynote that really stood out to me, and that was that roughly 25% of the work that we do is technical, and the other 75% is teamwork, collaboration, and communication. I think most people would agree that face-to-face is the most effective communication method that we can use. And just dropping down 1 or 2 levels to use a video call instead adds an extra layer of complication that with the technology. We lose a lot of expression from people's body language, and in practice, only one person can really talk at a time. I mentioned the cloud enablement team at the Financial Times earlier. They have 4 team members based in our London office. Andrew Grant is the 5th member. He's a principal engineer, and he works remotely full-time from The Hague in the Netherlands. The team had previously worked with someone else who was remote, so it wasn't a complete shock when Andrew joined the team. But what they did find is that the tools that they were using for collaboration no longer fit their requirements. Google Meet is our default option for video calls at the FT, and the team found that they struggled with poor video quality when they were pair programming. The screen sharing wasn't sufficient detail for what they wanted to do. So what they did was they spent a 2-week sprint trying out the different options that had appeared over the last couple of years, and they decided that Visual Studio Code's Live Share plugin was the option for them, alongside using another tool called Whereby for video, and that solution fit their needs best. I spoke with my friend Lee Port for this talk as well, and he emphasised tooling. He's a senior site reliability engineer at the Government Digital Service, and he leads the Platform as a Service team. His team, along with most of the teams at GDS, are remote first. People will sometimes come into the office, but it's not uncommon for the whole team to be working from completely different locations. For whiteboarding and architecture sessions, they said that they find that using an interactive whiteboard makes collaboration much easier for them, because it allows everyone to view and draw on the board and then easily save and share their diagrams afterwards. They use Google Jamboards, but there's lots of other alternatives out there too, including ones that are fully online, so you don't need a physical component to buy or use. Switching to shiny new tools probably won't just magically solve all of our challenges with remote communication, but it is important to remember that new tools do appear, and we should try and make our communication as frictionless as possible. It's worth taking the time to evaluate these alternatives if the tools you're using don't quite meet your needs anymore. Because our tools are the foundation upon which we build everything else. If you've ever had to fight against blurry screen shares or poor audio, or spent 5 minutes trying to get a meeting room to connect, then you'll know that it's a miserable experience that detracts from what we're really trying to do in the first place, and that's communicate and collaborate. I've mostly talked about video calls so far, but to drop down another level of communication, text really can struggle to convey intent and emotion. I think most of us probably use some form of instant messaging at work. We use Slack, and I personally think it's pretty great. However, there are a new set of challenges that appear when we rely only on text. Someone may find a short, direct sentence to be quite rude or abrupt, while the writer was only trying to be to the point, with no rudeness intended. On the other hand, if you're more like me and you sprinkle a liberal use of emojis into your every Slack message, that can come across to some people as unprofessional or flippant, depending on the circumstance. This can be even harder when we're split across countries or have people whose first language isn't English. While that's our primary business language at the FT, it's easy for us to forget that not everyone has the same cultural background when it comes to phrases. A small example of this was when I discovered some of my friends in Sofia were confused by my use of the word tar to say thank you. I hadn't considered that that might be unique to British English and that not everyone understood what I meant. That's a harmless example, but misunderstandings could cause problems in other situations, like maybe pair programming or planning sessions. The cultural subtleties of language can be very difficult to grasp on both sides, and it's really important that we acknowledge that. Another thing that can get lost easily with remote communication is the casual team bonding chat. We found that having a private team channel works quite well for a remote team to socialise and feel a little bit more comfortable with each other. And that's alongside a public channel where obviously our customers can reach out to the team and ask for our help. Even moving desks within the same building can have a major impact. When we moved to our new office, there's now more physical floors between my operations team and some of the other technology teams. What we've found is that people are much less likely to just walk past our area, and that means they're less likely to just mention things in passing. One of our current challenges that we're working on is how we build that relationship and communication back up again, so that they don't forget to tell us about important things that they're planning or working on, without needing to specifically schedule a meeting. I mentioned at the start of my talk that I struggled with a way to include the whole operations team when we wanted to make changes to the way that we worked. I was really used to being able to quickly get feedback or agreement from everyone. I didn't want people to feel excluded from these decisions, but equally I didn't want to have to send an email to the whole team and then wait 3 days for people to read it and then respond. When I told my boss this, they gave me some advice from Amazon's founder and chief executive officer. Jeff Bezos talks about decision-making and how decisions can generally be grouped into 2 different types. Type 1 decisions are like walking through one-way doors. That decision has a fairly big impact, and it's really hard to reverse if you later change your mind. Type 2 decisions, on the other hand, are much easier to reverse, like walking back through an open doorway. I realised that most of the changes that we wanted to make to improve the team fell into this second category. So rather than try and get full agreement from everyone on the team, we realised that it was far better just to run our ideas past everyone we could reach at the time, make changes based on their feedback, and then just try it out for a week or 2. If the team felt that things weren't working out within a week or however long, we could very easily go back to the old way of doing things without too much effort. Those larger Type 1 decisions, which have a much wider impact, are where the FT's technical governance group come in. Because our technical teams are split across 3 different locations, it can be quite difficult to make those wide-reaching changes that affect multiple areas of the business and require work from multiple teams. The aim with the group is to ensure that everyone across the business has that opportunity to provide feedback on high-impact changes. In the past, when this was started out, it was only technology leadership that was invited and attended. But the problem with this was that it was quite hard to make changes or proposals if only 1 or 2 people from that group were unavailable. Instead, what we do now is we open it up to a much wider group, not just senior management. And this allows us to have more scrutiny from more experts across the business. People submitting proposals are expected to already have broad agreement before they come to the group, which meets every 2 weeks. This fortnightly review allows everybody to share their feedback and identify gaps that might have been missed, be aware of any upcoming changes that might impact their team as well. The last point that I want to touch on regarding communication is meetings. And as I mentioned before, face-to-face is often the most efficient way to discuss things and come to a decision. But I think probably most people would agree that we all hate meetings to some extent for different reasons. Maybe we have too many, or maybe we feel that some of the ones that we do have are just a bit of a waste of time. Jennifer Johnson is one of our product managers, and she wrote a great blog post about when Ben, a deaf colleague, joined their team. It meant that they had to rethink how they ran their meetings in order to be able to include him. It turns out that actually a lot of the guidelines that promote accessibility and inclusivity are genuinely just good ideas for all meetings, not just meetings that Ben is in. For example, to only have one person at a time talk during a meeting. This is especially true for me when I dial in remotely, because I find it impossible to hear what's going on when 2 or more people start talking simultaneously. All meetings should have a clear purpose and agenda so that people can prepare ahead of time. This really helps to reduce the wasted time at the start of the meeting, and actually reduces the number of unnecessary meetings as well, because we can just confirm things over email. Lee at the Government Digital Service suggested one more guideline, which I want to mention, but it's not included in this article. At GDS, if 3 people are remote, then even if everyone is in the same office, everyone dials in remotely. If everyone is in a room with just a handful of people remote, it's really hard for those people who are online to participate. But by making everybody remote, it ensures that everyone is on that same level of communication. Time zones can make meeting scheduling quite tricky as well, and Sofia has a 2-hour time difference between London. I didn't think that was quite that big, really. But when I was based in Sofia last year, helping to set up the FT's new office, I quickly found that once I included lunch, that 2-hour time difference meant that we really only had a 3-hour window per day where we could schedule meetings. And that was even before we started looking at people's actual calendars and their other commitments. This makes it even more important that when we do run a meeting, we try and make sure that it's as effective and efficient as possible, because we really want to do our best to avoid situations where people are skipping lunch or staying late to join a meeting. That's really not great for our morale or our culture. So we've talked about some of the communication challenges and how we can kind of try to overcome those. Let's talk a bit about building an effective remote team culture. Psychological safety is one of the most important things, I think. It's the ability to show and employ oneself without fear of negative consequences of self-image, status, or career. For example, do your teams feel comfortable asking questions in public? Do they feel that they can provide honest feedback, or raise concerns that they might have? Google and Rework recently released the results of Project Aristotle, and this was a research project conducted over several years with the aim to identify what makes an effective team at Google. The most important factor that they found, by far, was that their effective teams had a really strong sense of psychological safety. This meant they were able to take risks, show vulnerability, admit when they didn't know the correct answer. Interestingly, for this talk, being located in the same place was not significantly related to an effective team. So for me, what this suggests is that remote teams absolutely can be effective, but that we may have to work a little bit harder at doing so. I definitely recommend reading the full report. There's some really useful information there, along with some tools that you can use to measure and improve your team's safety. I will tweet out my slide deck as well at the end of the talk, so don't worry if you haven't taken a photo or if you miss one of the links. Amy Edmondson presented a TED talk on this topic as well, and she outlines 3 steps that everyone can take to build psychological safety within a team. First, we can frame problems as an opportunity to learn, not as a failure on the individual or team's part. Second, We can be open and honest when we ourselves make mistakes, or when we don't know the answer to a question. And finally, we should demonstrate and encourage curiosity by asking questions publicly and supporting those who do. This culture of trust and safety is a very difficult thing to build, but it's also a difficult thing to share, particularly when new people join the team. People will learn and pick up culture by observing how other people on the team behave and react. And this is much harder for remote staff when you don't have that face-to-face. It's a good idea for everyone, not just remote teams, to meet, discuss, and agree on a shared set of team values that they believe are important. The customer products team at the FT did this recently, and they published their tech principles online for everyone to view. I quite like this one, especially as someone who is often on the sharp end of production incidents at 3 a.m. For new or remote staff, this really helps set the expectation of what we consider to be important and what we expect from our teammates at the FT. Another one that I quite like is to assume good faith, which sounds simple, but when I'm stressed, sometimes I find myself getting frustrated and venting slightly. It's always worth remembering that we don't work with people who are causing problems intentionally or doing a bad job. When we look at code or services that aren't quite up to the standard that we'd normally prefer, there's often context for why things have ended up that way. It's far more valuable to lead by example, to improve things, and then make them better for everyone. When people are remote, there aren't normally as many opportunities for that collaboration, because it's not going to happen as organically as in person. You can't just turn around to them and ask them for help. With the cloud enablement team that I mentioned before, they schedule a daily pair programming session, and this really helps with making remote collaboration happen. It becomes the default rather than something that we have to go out of our way to arrange every day, and then one person is busy and then another person can't do that. One more way of meeting people across your company is by coffee roulette. We use a tool called Donut to do this, and the idea is that every 2 weeks, everyone who's joined the Coffee Roulette Slack channel is paired with someone that they haven't met before. When they're free, it's up to them to organise a coffee and a chat, and that can be a video call as well. We found that for people who are remote, this can really help to be paired with people that they might otherwise not meet. It really encourages people to break down silos and build connections across the business. Another way that we do this is to encourage people to rotate through teams, whether that's permanent or just a temporary basis. The reliability engineering team do this, and they're responsible for building the tools that handle our monitoring, alerting, and support information. They're widely used across the business. Every quarter, they have 2 or 3 people join them from different teams, and when these people return back to their home team, they take with them the knowledge of the tools that they've helped to build, and then they share that knowledge with their home teams. And this has been really great for sort of really getting that engagement with the reliability engineering team. Because of our remote culture, we've actually had people join from Sofia and Tokyo, which has been really cool to see. Monthly tech talks are another thing that we do, and internal and external speakers present a conference talk that anyone can join. We make sure that we've got a talk space reserved in each office, and then live stream the talks to all of our locations. This really does require good audio-visual equipment and connectivity in each location. Otherwise, it's going to be a bit of a painful, stuttery experience. You need to make sure that you provide a way for people to ask questions online, and that everyone speaks into the microphone so that people on the live stream can hear. Because these are recorded, it means that people who are in different time zones, or just busy at the time, can watch them at a more suitable moment for them. We had our annual FT hackathon this last month ago as well, and this helps people to collaborate across different locations. We have people from across the company come together in small teams for a couple of days, and then they work on an idea or proof of concept. I'm sure you're all familiar with hackathons. Once time is up, they present their work to our judges, and prizes are awarded based on a few different categories. We've had teams join from New York, London, Sofia, and Manila. We find it easier to keep teams in one location, but there have been some crossovers. This year, one of our Sofia teams won the Most Likely to Enable New Services and Products category, and Kate de Reerden, our Chief Product and Information Officer, presented them their inflatable trophy over Hangout. She then took me to one side and said I needed to leave enough room in my hand luggage to bring their prizes and trophy with me when I flew to Sofia last week. So those are some ideas about how we can help other locations feel included with the whole company. But there's still a lot of context that we don't understand about people until we meet them in person and build those social bonds. Joe Salisbury is familiar with this. He's a product manager at Giant Swarm. They're a fully distributed company that builds and delivers Kubernetes as a service for enterprises. Normally, everyone will work from their own location. I don't think they've got a central office at all. He says it's really important that they meet up twice a year to work together in a single location, see people in person, and then do some social team events as well. This really helps to build that trust and understanding between people, because normally they'd only ever see each other on video calls. It's a huge benefit for them to spend some time together to work, and then to relax as well afterwards. And when we were setting up the FT's Sofia office last year, we spent a few days in Sozopol on the Bulgarian coast. I found this a really good way to actually get to know our new team members who before I'd only really communicated with by email and Slack. It was really good, and we got to get a lot of work done as well as enjoy the beach, which was lovely. The last point on culture that I want to touch on as well is that we encourage everyone to take advantage of our flexible working policy. We try and make it easy for our staff to work in a way that suits them best. And then often there are a whole wide range of things that people will use this for. And that's from working from home to collect a package that's going to be delivered, or being able to support and provide care for their family. Because we widely encourage people to use this across the whole company, it means that everyone is able to support everyone is able to support remote working. Many teams will work entirely remote from home 1 day a week, and that way everyone gets to understand these challenges in communication, as well as the benefits from working outside of the office. So, what are those benefits? If remote work makes communication and team building so much more challenging, why not just have everyone work from the office full time? Well, as I mentioned just now, it allows our staff to be a lot more flexible. They can save time by avoiding their daily commute, and that lets them have a better work-life balance. There's always the advantage of being able to recruit from a far wider pool of talent without needing to pay relocation costs. This is especially true if you're not based in or near a tech hub city. Lee mentioned at the Government Digital Service that because it's a government agency, they have to go through security clearance checks. So for them, hiring new staff is even more expensive in time and money than it is for most of us. Because they have the remote-first culture, it lets them keep people who are otherwise going to move outside of London and then look for new work. Enabling remote work lets us improve the diversity of our teams as well. And I don't just mean in terms of culture, gender, or sexuality, but diversity in people who have responsibilities of care. We can hire great people who need to pick up their children from school every day, or look after a family member who isn't well. And finally, we can look at time zones as a benefit rather than a limitation. Our customers are global. People don't stop reading the Financial Times outside of London office hours. By having teams in locations across the world, we can help support those customers better, no matter where they are or what time it is locally. We're nearly at the end now, so there's just a couple of things that I want to say before we wrap this up. This is a new talk for me, and this is the second time that I've given it to a real audience. So I'd really appreciate any feedback that you might have so I can make this better. And I'd be grateful if you could rate my talk on the Codemotion app, or I think there's iPads at the exits as well. That'd be great. If you've got any questions or stories of your own, please feel free to come and have a chat with me afterwards. I'll be around for the rest of the conference as well, so just have a chat in the corridor. And as I mentioned, I will share my slides on Twitter, so it will have easy links to all of the resources that I mentioned in my talk. My username is eFinlay24. So to summarise what we've talked about today, There is no magic solution that will solve all of our problems. And if you do find one, I'd suggest you sell it for a lot of money. It takes effort and time to overcome those communication challenges and to build a remote culture. And I want to leave you with three main things that we can do. First, to make sure that our teams have the tools that they need for remote collaboration. Second, to think remote first for communication and ensure that everyone is included. And finally, to make small changes, to iterate and find out what works for your teams, because what works for us may not work for you. Thank you very much.